Over 170 years ago, Henry David Thoreau observed, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." Is this you? Do you feel trapped in the rat race we call life? Are you truly the person you desire to be? Are you unhappy with where you find yourself physically, mentally, or spiritually? Let's make the life changes necessary to empower you with happiness and contentment, belief and confidence in yourself. Join the discussion with countless other people who want nothing more than to be the best version of themselves that they can be. Welcome to Better with Jimmy Blackman. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Better. I'm your host, Jimmy Blackman, and excited about today's show. You know, when I think of the words grit, determination, tougher than nails, I see a face in my mind, and that person is Sage Norton. So I'm excited to talk to Sage today. Welcome to the show, Sage.
So good to be here. Great to see you too.
Great to see you. I was just thinking I guess I've known you almost 20 years now, right? When you came in through a mutual running friend, Renee Fitzgerald, but it's been way too long since I've seen you.
Yeah, 15 years probably. That's how old my son is. So when I left Fort Campbell, probably.
Yeah. I'm sure if we got together at the Army 10 miler, it would be like we were 25 again.
I'm sure.
Because I'm mentally still there, right?
Just add in Gary Brimmer and a few more, and it would be like old times, right?
Just don't call the police. So a little bit about Sage, a little background. She's from Westville, New Jersey, went to Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. She was a collegiate indoor All-American in track, commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Army in 2002 into the Medical Service Corps, deployed to Iraq with the famed 101st Airborne Division Air Assault Screaming Eagles. She has the expert field medical badge, and she is airborne and air assault qualified. So for the layman out there, that means she jumped out of airplanes and rappelled out of helicopters. And I have a great story for that one. What a story to start with. So the culminating event of air assault school is a 12-mile ruck march. So you wear your combat uniform, your boots, everything, and you have a 35-pound rucksack on your back. Starts early in the morning. It's at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which is always, unless you're January, February, it is hot, humid, miserable, a lot of heat casualties. That's one of the big challenges. In the summer months, they usually start at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and you can't drink enough water. But they start everyone in the class, males and females alike, together. And it essentially becomes a race for the fit. For those who are there to do business, it is to win the 12-mile ruck march is vitally important. In fact, I had General David Petraeus on a podcast about leadership a while back, and he bragged more about that, I think, than anything else, being honor grad of his air assault class and being first in the 12-mile road march. So they start the males and females together, and who, of course, won the 12-mile ruck march in Sage Norton's class? Second Lieutenant Sage Norton, of course. How did that feel?
It was great. I mean, like you said, I went in August. It was right before we were getting ready to deploy, and part of the deal was that I would get an air assault scout once I finished school and once we were completely packed and everything for deployment. So I remember the night before being really nervous and packing my ruck, and I had my husband check it like 3-4 times, because the last thing you want to do is not have a pair of socks or something when you do the layout after you finish. And showed up at 3:30 that morning, like you said, started at 4 o'clock for the road march. Now, because I went in the summertime, we had cadets that were also in our class. So we had some ROTC cadets and some West Point cadets. And if you're not familiar with air assault school, what happens is you all carry a rubber duck, and then whoever is the leader gets to carry the guidon of the air assault school. So at Fort Campbell, it's an out and back loop, 3 miles each way. So 2 times a loop. So for 12 miles. And we were at probably I don't know, mile 7, mile 8, really right. But I'd say probably with 4 miles to go, and there was a group of 3 of us, and it was myself and then 2 West Point cadets that were really kind of like the last 3 standing. And um, one of the cadets and I, we kind of like moved a couple strides ahead of the third one that was with us, and then finally, after probably another 15 minutes or so of back and forth, he finally looked at me and he said, "Ma'am, I can't keep up with you. Here's the guidon."
Awesome.
So
So he was carrying the guide on at the time.
he had the guidon the whole way. I had never had the guidon, and I and I don't know. Like when you do air assault school and you do PT, you really run in formation, so nobody knows you from the next soldier.
Right.
And then I have a bunch of young cadets that are thinking, "There's no way a girl's beating me." And I was young at the time too, so I'm really only a couple years older than them, and I'm thinking in my head, "There's no way you're beating me. That guidon is going to be mine."
So did you have a
So,
plan like where you were going to make your move? You were going to, I'm sure you were judging, okay, he's
of
hurt.
course, of course, I knew he was hurting, and I knew that those last 4 miles that there was no way. There was no, that was mine. Like there
So
was.
see, that's what when I say tough as nails, grit, determination, that's what has always separated you in my mind. And that is some women would have said, wow, third in my air assault class and first woman, that would be good. That never entered your mind, did it?
Oh no, I was not finishing anywhere but first. It was not happening. And I had said to my husband the night before, I was like, "I'm winning this road march. I'm just letting you know." And it's funny that, and he knew that. Obviously, we had been married just under a year at that point, but he and I went to EFMB at Fort Campbell when I was still at Fort Bragg. And the same thing, you do the 12-mile road march. And at that point, he was in the 187 with the Rakasans. And he goes to, they had their command and staff meeting the following Monday after we finished on, I think we either finished Thursday or Friday. And at that point, I had gone back to Fort Bragg because I was TDY. And they get in there, and the commander was like, "I can't believe you let your fiance beat you in the road march." And he, stone cold face, said to them, like, "All these infantry guys, she'd beat you too. I'm not sure what the problem is." Like, I was like, "Okay." So,
I'm just the guy that got the lucky ticket. She's mine.
yeah. I mean, the rest is really history, right?
Absolutely. So moving on through this pedigree, ran on the All Army team. She and her husband Mark have 2 children. They live in Maryland now. We'll talk a little bit more later in the discussion about what you're doing now. But looking at some of your running pedigree, the first number I've been informed is an error. I thought your PR in the mile was 5:17, but I need a correction, obviously.
Yeah. So actually, I was a middle distance runner in high school, and my PR in the 1600 is actually a 5:11.
Okay.
So I guess that converts to about a 5:12. And I would say in high school, I probably ran 10 to 15 miles between 5:11 and 5:15 or so. So,
Right.
but yeah, that 5:17 is my adult mile PR.
Your
Which,
adult mile. When you were a child, you ran 5:11.
yeah, well, but that's what I was trying to get. I was trying to break that 5:10 mark when I ran that 5:17. Like we were working towards that,
Yeah.
Can't let the 15-year-old version of Sage be the best one.
That's for sure. But the next number is even more impressive in my mind, and that is she has a marathon PR of 2:46. She ran 2:46 at Grandma's Marathon in Duluth, Minnesota, where she finished 6th there. How did that race go for you?
That was actually, so I actually think I finished 33rd of the women because it was one of the real big qualifiers for Olympic trials at that point. Pouring down rain at the start. And if anybody has run the Grandma's Marathon, it's a point-to-point race with a slight net downhill, and it's in northern Minnesota in the end of June. It was about maybe 37 degrees at the start, and you start at a old car dealership, so there's no place to go inside. So there was people legitimately hiding in the porta potties, like, and I was the fittest I'd ever been in terms of running, the fittest, the thinnest, mentally just in a really good spot. And I got to the line and I did not, I don't think I was part of the elite group at that point. That for anyone who knows, the Grandma's Marathon is super fast every year, regardless of whether it's a year to qualify for Olympic trials or not. And I think that the rain broke as soon as we started, and I just kind of kept telling myself, like, 26 miles, here we go. My husband's waiting at the finish line. Let's just see how this goes. And um, I mean, we can talk about this later, but I'm not a GPS runner. I'm not one that runs with a heart rate monitor. Like, it's just me and my G-Shock. That's it. We clicked off the miles, and I, I met some guy who was from Maryland actually, and we probably ran 18 of those miles together. And never once did I hit that like 18-mile mark where I'm like, oh man, this could get ugly. It was just the most well executed race I've ever run in my life.
Yeah, it's wonderful when they come together like that. I ran 2:33 at Richmond in 2001, and it was one
Mm-hmm.
of those days, the same thing where I never hit the proverbial wall. I was reeling people into the end. I wound up third overall, and I was at sixth at like 22 miles, and just I felt like I was gaining momentum. You're incredibly fatigued. You're feeling, that you're totally depleted, but when you have those kind of out of body experiences where you feel like I can just keep going, which must have you had to feel like you could keep going because you've run a lot of marathons, but you also went into the ultra world where you ran some 50K races, some 50-mile races, and 100K races. So that's 62 miles and did really well there. What's the big difference, do you think, the transition from track, road, 10Ks, 5Ks, half marathons to ultras?
So I definitely think it boils down to one thing, and it's really time on your feet. And whether you're somebody who is competitive in the road racing world, marathon world, ultra world, or you're somebody who recreationally does it, I mean, it legitimately is time on your feet. And the more time you spend on your feet, the more successful you will be. And that doesn't translate to running more miles. That legitimately means time on your feet. I was actually just on a JFK forum not too long ago, and somebody who's not from the area was asking about the race and how many miles they should put in, and just a bunch of different questions. And
So
I
just for the
and I
listener, the JFK is a 50K trail run,
50-mile.
50-mile trail run. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
go ahead.
Yep, yep. And somebody had asked, like, so with the JFK, the first you start on the road, then you end up on the Appalachian Trail, and then you run on the C&O Canal for an entire marathon, and then you finish the last 9 miles on the road. And somebody asked a question about training for it because they weren't from the area, and they were like, well, how do I train for it? And I wrote back and I was like, slightly unpopular opinion here, but I never trained on the trails. I never ran over 22 miles, and I was very successful in this race. In 2013, I actually got second place in the JFK 50 miler. And I said, the biggest thing is that you need to spend the time on your feet. You need to train your body to stand in the vertical position for 12 hours and not take a break.
Hmm.
You need to train your body to be able to have that out of body experience where you are in the ultra world more so than in a marathon. I think because a lot of them are really double the distance. You need to be ready to go on an emotional roller coaster ride. I mean, I'll be the first one to admit I cried during both the JFKs I have run. And the first one I cried at 25 miles, and the second one I cried at 38 miles. And it and was I sad? No. Was I in pain? Yes. But I think my body was just needed to release those endorphins. And both times I cried, I got over it. And the first time I had 25 miles to go, and the second time there was another girl and I, and we were vying for second and third place. And at that point in time, second place got a spot in Western States.
Ooh,
you know
ooh.
so that was one of those things. You didn't have to enter the lottery, you got one of those slots. And I wasn't going to run Western States, but I'll be damned if I was going to let go down without a fight.
Yeah.
But I think time on your feet. So I wrote in the forum, do your run, come home, mow your grass, walk the dog. Don't sit down till 8 o'clock at night. Like train your body to be uncomfortable.
That's interesting because for me, I've dabbled a little bit, and now I'm actually jogging a little bit now to see if my 4 knee surgeries later I could possibly do this, because it's a very different approach in that my problem's always been I am addicted to the numbers. And I mean, I've tracked ever since I was 9 years old, every mile, every split, everything. And
Mhm.
to run and accept that you're going to run 12 minutes a mile is hard. It's hard in a marathon when you can run, when I ran 2:33, I'd run a 31:03 10K. To go out at 5:50 pace in a marathon, I mean, the first 10 miles, it was like torture, because I was like, I can go, I can go. Well, if you go, you're going to meet Jesus on the side of the road about mile 22.
Yeah. If you go, you're going to stop.
Yeah. And so, I, to be patient and accept, I ran a trail run the other day for an hour, and I looked at my pace and I was like, you know what? If I did this for 19 hours without stopping at 10 to 12,000 feet, I could be top 50 at Leadville.
Yeah. Oh,
It's not
absolutely.
that,
And
you
I think you like really have to weigh those odds and you have to decide. I mean, and something like JFK is it's technically not a hard race. Like I always tell people, they're like, what advice would you give me about JFK? You need to get off the Appalachian Trail in a vertical position. That is it. You need to not fall. Somebody every year is taken down the last 2 miles because they fell and broke their hip.
yeah,
Like and you don't want to get taken off in a switch, like off the switchbacks on a stretcher. Like, so I mean, that's the advice I could give people. Time on
yeah.
your feet and stay in that vertical position. Not always possible. However, you get through that. And me, I don't like to run in the dark, so beat that sunset.
Oh yeah. Well, I
Yeah,
and you did. I'm looking you did the Weymouth Woods 100K, 62 miles in 10 hours and 44 minutes. So they usually start nice and early
they
and
do.
finish before sunset. Because you're right, night running is very different.
It is, and especially so the Weymouth Woods is a 4 mile loop, even worse. How
Ooh,
about that?
that
Yeah,
takes a
right
long
in
time around and around.
yep, right at Fort Bragg, and I had run it 2 years back to back. I had signed up for it the Wednesday before. It was on a Saturday morning. I don't know, one of Gary Bremer's great ideas, I think. I had signed up for it before, and the first year I finished after it was dark, and I was like, the next year, nope, finishing before sunset. I'm like, I don't know how we're gonna figure this out, but we're gonna finish before sunset. So I think I was about 50 minutes faster the second year.
Awesome. So what
Yeah.
led you to running and distance running in particular? What got you there?
So I played soccer my whole life. Soccer is really my first true love. And I was one of those kids that could just run around for hours. I really attribute it to my mom. Um, for the first 11 years of my life, my mom was a single mom. She worked a lot. We had a lot of support from our family. My brother is 13 months older than me. And um, one of the things that she always did is every Sunday morning we went for a bike ride. Like I just remember it. Like every Sunday morning we always got on our bikes and she would run right next to us. And literally as far back as I can remember, that type of fitness was always a part of our lives.
Hmm.
And then I started to play soccer. My brother, who was a year older than me, was a runner. And it was just kind of one of those things that we did. I mean, you could do it anywhere. And he was a year ahead of me. He ran cross country. I decided I wasn't going to give up soccer, but he also ran track. And so I wanted to run track and I wanted to be good like him. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. He was always somebody I looked up to when I was younger. And actually, even still, he's pretty accomplished, awesome guy. But I just wanted to be like my brother. And
Awesome.
we running kind of came naturally.
That's awesome. What
Mm-hmm.
what's what's the hardest thing you've ever done?
Ah, wow, you would ask that question. After my daughter was born, my husband deployed 10 days later. And at that point, I had a 17-month-old and a 10-day-old baby. We lived in North Carolina. We had no family around. And I actually got sepsis from childbirth. And for 5 weeks, I never said anything to anybody. And I was literally dying from the inside out.
Mm.
So I would say, looking back, that's a pretty dark spot. And funny
Yeah.
because that really has nothing to do with running, but
Yeah.
I mean that was definitely, and the climate at that point, obviously in the military, was such that I didn't really want to tell him what was going on because he was in Kandahar. At that point, he was with third group, and he didn't need to be worrying about me at home. So my saving grace was that our neighbor was a PA in battalion and third group and knew something wasn't right. And every single day he checked on me. And then on Easter of 2009, he took me to the emergency room and basically saved my life.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So you never reached out. He actually luckily found you.
Yeah,
Why do you think he didn't reach out aside from Mark's deployment?
I think um I just think like I'm one of those people, like I'll figure it out on my own. And I mean, I now I knew something wasn't right because I had always been a fine-tuned athlete. Like if that makes sense, like
Yeah.
people are always like, "Oh,
You knew
well,
your
you're an
body.
oh yeah, absolutely knew my body." And people always like kind of push it to the wayside because they're like, "Oh, well, you've been fit your whole life. Like childbirth should be easy." Okay, well, that's a great broad statement, but that is definitely not a factual statement for everybody. And I don't think I really wanted to burden anybody. And we had great neighbors, and we lived on a street where we basically had like one street husband because everybody else's husbands were deployed. And
Deployed, yeah.
so, yeah. And so we had a group of like just really awesome moms. And then like one husband who, if something broke, they'd come and fix it, and had this great support system. And I didn't want to burden anyone. And it's funny because before my neighbor took me to the emergency room, my mom said to my dad, my parents were living in New Jersey at the time, and my mom said to my dad, Sage sounds really funny on the phone. I'm just going to go down there and I'm not going to leave until I figure out what's going on.
Wow.
And
Nice.
yep. And so I like the turning point was I had finally decided I was going to get on the treadmill and start running. And Reagan at that point was 5 weeks old. And I got on the treadmill right before Easter, and I maybe ran a mile. And when I got off the treadmill, I couldn't stand up straight.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. Let's dive into that for a minute. It's number one, that sense of community in the military is just unique. You don't get that in the average neighborhood. Because of necessity and this need, the neighborhood dad or whatever, that's going to do everything because everybody else is deployed. But that balance is incredibly hard. Now, you're an active duty officer. You've got two little kids. So you've got a job, you've got two little kids, your husband's deployed, you're an athlete. How did you approach trying to balance everything?
So at that point, I was actually out of the service. I got out 2 days before Chase was born.
Okay.
We were transitioning from Campbell to Bragg. And but like you said, that community is huge. If you ever have the opportunity to experience that community, and that crosses all branches of services. It doesn't matter if you're in the Army on a Navy base, like you're welcomed with open arms. That really is truly how it is. I think it's like anything else. Like you kind of embrace the suck altogether, right? I mean,
Instead of complaining about it all the time, you accept that this is going to suck.
yeah, and there's nothing quite like somebody who knows what you're going through, even if their situation is different. I mean, they understand and can identify, and you truly come to terms with the fact that just because you're not blood doesn't mean you can't be family. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And everybody looks out for everyone else. I mean, that they don't have to have known you, but for 30 days, 60 days, and really everybody looks out for everybody else. I think one of the best things when we lived in at Fort Bragg is because I joked when, from the time in my bio, I put that from the time my kids were old enough to sit in a jogging stroller, they were literally in the jogging stroller. Even back then, Chase has always been an early riser. I swear the kid needs like 4 hours of sleep. He is completely my clone. And he would get up every morning at 4:30, and I would put him in the jogging stroller, and I would walk up the street and meet my neighbor. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, from the time he was 3 or 4 months old, he was strapped into that jogging stroller, and we were either walking the dogs or running or doing that stuff. I mean, you just have to prioritize your life. You prioritize your life. You have to make yourself number one. And maybe yourself being number one is 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I'm here to tell you that that doesn't change just because they get older. I mean, 4 o'clock in the morning is where it's at.
That's it. I took a picture of my watch and posted it today
I
at
saw that yesterday.
3:55. Hey, it's time to get it on. That's right.
Yeah, you just have to you have to figure it out. You have to balance it. And especially like as a mom with two small kids, I mean, we were fortunate enough that right after Chase was born, I bought a treadmill. So we've had a treadmill in our house. You kind of unleash the crazy on the treadmill. I mean, you have to, because like Fort Campbell and Fort Bragg, like in August, it's hot, and you're like, the kids are wild and crazy at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, let me tell you, you're not going out for a run at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So, but yeah, surround yourself with a great community. You don't need 20 friends. You need 3 you can count on. And in terms of, especially if you're an endurance runner, an endurance athlete, like you have to find people who have similar interests as you. And that's one of the things that I always had, even at Fort Bragg, a convoluted web of people who know people and people who know people. And actually, most of my best training partners I've ever met, I've been introduced through mutual friends who didn't live where we lived.
Right.
Even once I was out of the Army, that was, I mean, it still reigns true.
Right.
So
You hit on something key for me, and coaching executives, not anything to do with sport or anything. And that is, I hear all the time, I just don't have time. I just don't have time. And I'm like, no, actually, you have time. It's not a priority. And, I'll ask people a lot of times when I coach them, I want you to list your personal and professional priorities. And then for 2 weeks, I want you to track your time, where you spend every minute of every day. And I'll say, you're lying to me. What are you talking about? I'm lying to you. Where you
like
spend your
journal.
time, where you spend your time and money is your priorities. That's
Yep.
your priority, right? And usually it's a problem of time management. It's not, they waste a lot of time, and I pride myself in being very efficient. I get a lot done with the time I have, but I don't waste a lot of time. I'm focused on doing something, and I'll self-evaluate throughout the day. Like, okay, I need to do this, and this, and I keep lists and everything else, but I will start to do something and I'll catch myself and go, wait a minute. Do I really need to be doing that right now? Or is there something more urgent? I use Eisenhower's model of urgent and important. I mean, it's very simple, but it's a tool that just makes you think, is this what I need to be doing right now? Or should I be doing something else for whatever reason? And I think through that process all the time. And people, we could get off on a tangent on being late. I don't do late either, period. And I have people that, I work with that'll be late to meetings all the time. And then they'll, well, that last call was important, this, that, or the other. And I'm like, well, if I record that call and listen to all the wasted conversation that wasn't focused on, you got to be efficient with your time, because it's a finite resource. You only got so much. You're not getting any more. And so what you do with it matters, and prioritization is key. What was the Army experience like for you as a female officer?
So I actually have to say, for the most part, it was really good. I had my dream job to begin with, and I got to go to the 82nd Airborne Division, which, who doesn't want to be paid to fall out of airplanes? I mean, I do. So I was in the 307 Forward Support Battalion, which is the support battalion for 1st Brigade. And We, funny enough that you say that, because we had three officers, and I actually think I sent you a picture of
I've
Allie,
got it
Emily, and
up right now.
myself.
I've got it up right
So
now. You getting inspected, JMPI
yeah, that's
going.
my JMPI right there. That's my platoon sergeant at the time. My platoon sergeant next to me, the really tall man,
Yeah.
and he is still in the army actually, and he's the head of one of these lovely medical, the command sergeant major of one of these lovely medical units here down by the Pentagon. And there was actually three females in our company, which is kind of unheard of when you're in the 82nd, even in the support battalion.
I've got a
Yep. So
picture
right.
of them up.
Yep. So that's Emily in the middle, and then Allie on the tiny little one on the right hand side. I was the treatment platoon leader. Emily was the ambulance platoon leader, and Allie was the XO. And they called us Charlie's Angels, which funny enough. But so it was a really good experience at Fort Bragg. And I will say, and you've probably seen this as well, one of the things that sets you aside is your physical fitness, because all eyes are on you. Can you hack it? Can you stay with the boys? Are you a liability, or are you somebody that's going to be helpful? So I established that right off the bat. And the 82nd, much like the 101st, PT is huge. You know, we had All American Week, just like we have in the 101st. You know, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, and All American Week is established basically around sports. And at the time, they have, you know, road marches, races, everything from flag football. Well, my unit at the time, and this was definitely from the top down, our battalion commander was a really good runner. Our company commander was a really good runner. So it was always kind of like, let's keep up with Captain Ribestein. And our unit won the 10-mile road race at All American Week, like hands down. Like we won every single category, you know, soup to nuts from top to bottom. And it was, I mean, in terms of that, like I said, you establish yourself with your physical fitness. So if you're thinking about going into the service, even in today's service, which is different, and you're a woman, you better work on that, because nobody wants you to be at the back. Trust me.
So that can create another dynamic in that, I mean, because I know you would never be competitive in an unhealthy way that would negatively or
No.
adversely affect the unit. However, others get a vote. And so to have Sage Norton in your organization, potentially as another woman, and she dominates everything and she can't lose, and she shows us up to a degree. Did you ever experience any of that jealousy, envy along the way?
So I actually didn't. And I didn't have that at Fort Campbell either. I think one of the things that was really great at Fort Bragg, and I think this is prevalent pretty much everywhere, like women can be pretty catty to one another and, you know, say some terrible things behind each other's backs. But one of the things we had at Fort Bragg, like we had at Fort Campbell when you were our captain, was we had the the Army 10 miler team. And so at Fort Bragg, especially, we had a really competitive women's team. And those girls became like some of my best friends, and we did everything together. And we were able to meet for PT every morning leading up to basically from June until October. And so we did PT together every single day. And we came from every single unit on Fort Bragg. There was an engineer, we had a civil affairs. It was like we were all over the spectrum. And in terms of like strong, supportive women, I have to say that was probably single-handedly the most well-rounded, supportive group of women that I ever professionally worked with. Where, we were enlisted, officer, everything. Like our leader was a major. You know, I was a lieutenant. We had a couple E5s. Like that was an amazing experience. And even the same, like when I got to Fort Campbell, more so than running, because I spent majority of my time running with Renee and Meredith at that point wasn't on active duty. But I I was surrounded by a handful of really amazing women, and especially when we were in 159, like all of the people I looked up to that were females were all pilots. I
Yeah.
mean, every single one of them were pilots. And that's, you know, all joking aside, you say pilots are a different breed. Well, you guys are a different breed, and
Well,
so
so I'm dating myself here. I'm 11 years older than you, but were the twins still on the team at Bragg when you were there?
nope,
Okay, that was
nope.
in the 90s because
Yeah.
my first Army 10 miler was 1988. So
Yeah, no, they weren't. They weren't.
okay, they weren't gone.
Mm-mm.
I knew most
Mm-mm.
of that Bragg team, and you're right. It was all, I mean, and Fort Campbell, these 10 miler teams, these are, I mean, every woman that comes out is tough as nails anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
the work, and if they're not, they disappear pretty quickly. I mean, I coached
Yeah.
the Fort Campbell team probably 5 or 6 years, and
Hmm.
we would start, and folks come out, and I don't know what they envision, and then we start training, and we go to the track, and they they get to really do some introspection and get put in the hurt locker, and pretty quickly the cream rises to the top, and you've got a team of just horses that are ready
Yep.
to go.
A
It's
bunch of studs that really just want to be there. Hmm.
absolutely just want to work hard, meet at 6 o'clock and go really hard, and get rolling. What do you
Yeah.
think, if you could say, what was the real differentiator that has made you successful, made you good? What do you think that is, your real strengths?
I think the single most important thing is that I am my own number one fan. Like if you don't believe in yourself, forget it. You know, I really have always one of my mantras, like really going into any race, is that whether statistically on paper, I went into a lot of races where I should not have been the winner, but it's like the movie Any Given Sunday. Any given Sunday, you don't know what can happen. So bring the best version of yourself to the start line and make that person who's going to try and beat you really have to work. And let wherever that cookie crumbles and wherever it lies at the end of the day, like the only person responsible for that is you. And so I've always been pretty confident in that, but not overly confident. And my mom and my husband would actually tell you that I'm like an extremely humble athlete, and nobody ever really knows anything about my running. Nobody ever knows that I was in the army. Nobody knows anything. I mean, because the reality is nobody cares. I mean, they care, but like, do they really care? I mean, for the most part, we all have interesting stories. We've all done some pretty cool stuff in our lives. And we've also had some points in our lives that maybe haven't been so great. But I mean, I really do think that it comes down to like, be your own number one fan. Really,
Awesome.
you really have to, and put yourself number one. Like, like I said, it might be 4 o'clock in the morning, but you have to be number one, and you have to find what your passion is, and you have to be confident. And on top of that, you also have to find balance and days off. I
I don't
run,
do the days off so good.
I know, well, I don't do I do the days off even worse now that I'm not competitively running. But I mean, when you're tired, your body knows you're tired.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
when your performance really starts to fall off,
right.
and I loosely use that word performance because it's not just your performance in your sport or your craft. Like when your performance in life starts to fall off, like you need to take a step back and look in the mirror and see, where am I overextended? Where do I have to start saying no? Like it's okay to say no. Not and if somebody's offended that you said no because you didn't want to go to wherever on a Saturday night, are they really should they really be in your Rolodex? Probably not.
No. So that's a great segue into kind of crucible moments and making hard choices. You recently had a career change, made some hard decisions. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I spent 8 years as a government contractor. I worked for a great company, and we supported headquarters at Fort Detrick. And then COVID happened, and as you guys all know, COVID changed a lot. And it really changed the dynamics of the contract. And for about 18 months, I did not like the direction it was going. I still enjoyed the work, but I did not like the direction it was going. I wasn't necessarily a great person. I felt like I was really kind of failing my kids, like as a mom, and I felt like my husband thought I was just grumpy and unhappy all the time. And one of the luxuries of the job I had is that we always, from the beginning, even pre-COVID, is it was part-time and I got to work from home. So 98% of what I did was from home, unless I had to go into do meeting support or I needed something actually on Fort Detrick. But I found that I was so unhappy and that I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and doing 3 hours of work before I would send my kids to school, or during COVID when they were doing school at home. And then after dinner every night, I was spending another 3 to 4 hours on the computer. So the vast majority of my work was happening during the darkness. And I wasn't going to bed until 2 o'clock in the morning and getting back up and doing the same thing again the next morning at 5 o'clock. And it took me 18 months to finally bite the bullet and say, okay, I'm really unhappy and I really need to have like introspection and say, is this where I see myself in another 2 years? Because if this is not where I see myself in another 2 years, it's time. Like if you're questioning yourself for 18 months, it's time. You have to make that decision. And so the straw that broke the camel's back is I had finally worked up the courage. And I think a lot of it comes down to courage, like, because your time is valuable, but I finally worked up the courage. I was like, okay, that's it. I had drafted the letter. It was sitting on my computer desktop. And our contract lead was like, I'm going to assign you this. It's a reoccurring monthly detail and you'll be doing this. And I said, actually, I'm putting in my 30 days notice. And it was like the weight of the world dropped off my shoulders. And I came home and I was like, I can't believe that took me 18 months to do. It took me 18 months to work up the courage to decide that I needed to take my life back, even if it was just that small portion of it. And like I said, we were fortunate enough that it wasn't the difference between putting food on the table. Because obviously, if that had been the scenario, I would have had another job before I left that one. But and the company I worked for was great, and they were great through when my dad was really sick and when he passed away. But it was time, And what am I doing now?
Well, that's it. What are you doing now? Talk to us about what's in the life of Sage Norton these days.
Okay, so I actually I'd say life is pretty good. I'm the happiest I think I've ever been. And one of the deals I made with myself is that I said, if I'm going to leave my job, I'm going to put my time back into my community. So I started coaching cross country 6 years ago, and I was the assistant coach for 4 years. And then these last few years, I was the head coach. If you see that picture up front, the girl to my left is actually my best friend, and how cool to be afforded the opportunity to coach with your best friend. She's just fantastic. So 2 years ago, I got the head coaching job, and Frank Strakonsky, who is the older gentleman to my left, he's been coaching there for about 30 years. He and I share the head coaching duties. We coach both the boys and the girls, and it has truly been an amazing experience. Frank and I share the duty of writing all of our workouts. We obviously have a pretty special group that has shown up on the screen. We were Maryland 3A state finalists this year, so we were runners up. We lost by 5 points, but who's counting? And the girl who's actually holding the trophy is actually the 2021 Maryland 3A state champion. So I've been really given a great group of kids, some who are extremely talented and some who just work their butt off day in and day out for years at a time. Our workouts are hard. They've gotten harder as the athletes have gotten better. But I think one of my biggest things is that I always tell the kids day one, I wouldn't give you a workout that I haven't done or wouldn't do alongside of you. So that's just one of the things. That's one of the gigs I do. I also teach at our gym. I'm certified in body pump, and I also have my group fitness certification. And we put on an actual local 5K here in our town of Myersville, Maryland. So if anyone wants to look on a map, we're this tiny little town that literally looks like Mayberry. You drive down Main Street and the houses are all still from like the 1850s. We have about 700 people in our whole town. Well, I guess our town proper. We put on a 5K. I sit on the 5K committee. It's for our fallen police officer who actually was our town sheriff. And then I joined the local Lions Club. And so that's something that gives back to the community of Myersville. So I do that as well. And I mean, first and foremost, I'm a mom to my kids. And one of the things my mom always said to me is that you think your kids need you when they're in diapers, wait till they're teenagers. So my son is in 10th grade and my daughter is in 8th grade. And they really are like the light of our lives. And that's my husband behind me, who retired after 23 years of active duty and is now a government civilian at Fort Detrick.
All right. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts, philosophy on life, if you will. It's been a pleasure to watch you over 20 years. And, I was so fired up coaching the Fort Campbell team when you PCS from Fort Bragg to Fort Campbell. I was counting points at the time as the coach. I was pretty excited about that when Renee said, "Hey, guess who's coming to Fort Campbell?"
Yeah.
Cha-ching.
Yeah, we're pretty good.
Yeah. We never won the overall Commanders Cup there at Fort Campbell. And that was the stars have to align. I won it once in my entire career and got second once, and that was when we were in Germany. And we kind of, Germany gets to play a little different game. We combined some units, and we had some phenomenal runners, but you got to have incredible depth, of course. But we did win the mixed category there with our men and women together. So appreciate your time. More importantly, I appreciate your friendship, and thanks for coming on. And we look forward to keeping in touch.
Sounds good.
The old guard rolls and a hero passes by. Another one's gone to the other side.